When everything's hunky-dory, we're not leaning on superstition. But as things start to get away from us and we want answers, sometimes you got to reach for those answers and you reach in the wrong places.
I thought that In the Fire was a really interesting story, and I was wondering how you approached that cultural clash between the Marquez family and Dr. Burnham, especially because there's that bilingual aspect of the film too, where a lot of the characters are speaking Spanish throughout.
Yeah, we definitely wanted, any way in this movie that we could make the boy Martine, or Grace, Amber's character, the doctor, more of a fish out of water, more of an outcast, was a good thing. And so I think, whenever you're making a movie, you want to do some world building. There's been a lot of movies made, so finding, unique space is difficult sometimes. I've traveled quite a bit in South America, and I love Westerns, there's a great Western culture in South America, sort of gaucho culture. And I thought, okay, let's create a new space for this world here. And we'll do it, in South America. It'll be like a Western, but in a totally different space. And it really helped with all the other aspects of the movie. We have the kind of science versus religion. Latin America is an incredibly, incredibly religious place of faith, where, the sort of extreme viewpoint of that would be really evident. And so for Amber's character of Grace to come into this really foreign place where, she doesn't belong, they don't speak the language, they don't, she's a doctor, and everyone here, thinks the priest is the person who should be giving us all the facts in life, and really creating that distance.
Speaking of that distance and world building, in fact, did you discuss sort of what the town was like before Martine became a part of it? Like, how much superstition was there that he then added to?
I think superstition, certainly one of the points in the movie is that that whenever anything goes wrong in this town, this remote place, people need someone to blame. When you make a period movie, you want it to be relevant to society now. And unfortunately, I think we all still do this.
Right.
And so, there's a line in the movie that talks about, before all this place was an Eden. It was beautiful. It was, someplace you'd want to come to. And things have gone wrong. Plague, and the crops fail. The rains don't come, various things, some specific and some sort of atmospheric. And for whatever reason, Martine gets blamed for these things, maybe because he has some sort of supernatural powers, or maybe because, shit happens and we look for something to explain it away. And as far as the superstition aspect of it is, I think people lean farther into that when things aren't going well. When everything's hunky-dory, we're not leaning on superstition. But as things start to get away from us and we want answers, sometimes you got to reach for those answers and you reach in the wrong places.
How did you shape the settings? I think it was filmed in Italy and Guatemala. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right. How do you turn that into Colombia?
One interesting thing is, even though it wasn't really meant to be like Colombia per se, it was meant to be a little bit more mysteriously, remote valley south of it, on purpose. It's kind of sort of a romantic feel to it. Is this place real? Is it not? Because some things happen in the movie that make us question what's real and what's not. As far as how we placed it, so in southern Italy, they have these old fortified farmhouses from the 15th and 16th century.
Oh.
And so we basically rented for a very reasonable number for an indie movie, a 500-year-old farmhouse that was Spanish, actually, because southern Italy was part of Spain, or sort of conquered by the Spanish Empire at the time, and rented this really beautiful farmhouse, shot most of the scenes, the interiors, the stuff around the Marquez family farm there. And then when we went to Guatemala, we did kind of the townscape and, stuff that was out at the cemetery and out in the fields and the volcanoes and all that stuff, which were actively exploding during.
Oh my God.
It wasn't scripted that it was supposed to be like volcanic activity in the movie. And we were shooting in Antigua, which is the old colonial capital of Guatemala, UNESCO World Heritage Site, amazing place. And it's a town in the shadow of 3 volcanoes, all of which are active, and several of which were active during our production, which was like very apropos for superstition.
I love Amber Heard. I thought she was great. What was the collaboration process with her to kind of nail down Grace and what she stands for, how she's portrayed?
I don't want to say it was easy because we spent a lot of time, working on it, but Amber really naturally fit this character. And it is not a coincidence that she connected with a character who goes through what this character goes through in the movie, which is to say that, Grace in the movie is this sort of fearless truth teller who has great intentions and goes to this small town and wants to help this boy, and it isn't believed because she's a woman, because she's a doctor in a town that's led by a priest, because she's, a psychologist in a time when psychology wasn't respected. And Amber herself has gone through so much of this. She's been, in the movie, she's dragged through the public square and whipped for some of the things she says, sounds very familiar to her life. And so, she was connected to this character from an early point. And I think our main work was kind of trying to assemble how she, as where she starts in this movie is kind of an icy doctor who doesn't have a lot of, maternal emotional instincts. She wants to help this boy as a doctor, not as a mother. And the kid is strange and he's disturbed and he's not emotional either. But over the course of the film, these two unlikely characters, do create a bond, very an unlikely bond. And she does find these, maternal instincts to protect him, science or no science. And that was something that we probably, from an actor director standpoint, we're working on. Like, okay, how emotional should I be? How intimate should I be? Am I more of a doctor here? Or am I more, of a friend?
Speaking of Martin, what research did you do, or what was your approach to how he would be viewed scientifically versus how he would be viewed religiously at that time? This
was a fun one for me as a history nerd. So, and this also has to do with Grace and her sort of skills as a doctor or psychologist at this time. So what we couldn't do was use any modern science.
Right.
So basically kind of our rule was, anything written after like 1895, which is most of the stuff, unusable, so it needed how she approached medicine and how she approached diagnosing Martin and how he was acting needed to be based on what was available to them at that time. And we also didn't want to use we didn't want to be like, oh, okay, he's on the spectrum.
Right.
He's autistic. We didn't want it to be so hyper specific, like, especially in a time when those terms weren't available.
I remember when I started the movie, I was like, well, this is fake. She's a woman psychologist in like 1890. Let me look this up. I was like, oh no, it could happen. It's they were. But also I really liked the chemistry between Amber and Eduardo Noriega. And it was very much like not expected that it would go there, but then it did. Can you talk about what they saw in each other as characters?
We wanted to have, I was just saying how Amber is, her character is just like, she's a doctor, she's not emotional. She doesn't get intimate very easily. And we wanted the intimacy in the movie to be earned and authentic. And with her and Eduardo, who's the boy's father, it's these two very isolated people.
Mm.
She's isolated because all the things we just talked about, and physically isolated, but also she's doing this job that nobody, like you just said, nobody wanted a doctor. Nobody was looking for a psychologist back then, really, at all.
Okay.
Wasn't respected science. She was a woman, so she's an outcast in her own outcast profession. And this father, his son is the weird kid, the outcast of the community. And because the father has sort of protected his son, not even out of love, but sort of out of honor to his late wife, he's also an outcast in his community. And these are two just really lonely people who kind of start in a really rocky place and find a respect for one another. And so they're connecting, more out of sort of shared loneliness than it is of like, oh, I love you, I want to be with you,
right,
or whatever. Which is, I think, natural. It's not always true love, first kiss kind of thing. Sometimes it's a little more than that with adult romance.
Finally, the climactic fire, I guess a titular scene, was really great to see. And I was wondering, like, how did you film that? Like, what goes into that fire?
Yeah, that was a big one. So we did that in Guatemala. We built a barn that we consequently burned down. So it was a combination of practical fire and some embellishment with VFX. But I think with fire VFX, it only works if the practical element is there. If there's nothing practical going on and you just add fire, it looks pretty bad. So we had a lot of practical fire, but you got to do that safely. The thing was meant to burn, so you got to kind of be careful what you're doing. And we had actors in the scene. We also had horses in the barn, so there's a lot going on. And then smoke, that the smoke would clutter up very quickly. So we'd have to be sort of letting that out. And also we wanted some smoke in the scene. So, and then there was also a part of the barn that was, the barn starts to collapse while they're in there. So our production designer had created this sort of this movable beam that was like not structurally necessary, but looked like it was. And when needed, we could just crash it down to the ground, light it on fire and crash it down to the ground.
Very wise. That's when I would just be like, okay, well, I guess I'm not making a movie because I'm just going to fire in the background.
Well, you never quite know, with those kinds of scenes, and you don't have indie movie, you don't have time, everything's ambitious and a struggle, but you have to do it safely and you want to do it well so that the scene really, the big scenes, you really want them to pop. And I'm glad you liked that one.
Yeah,
we put a lot of work and energy, resources into that one, and it needed to. That's one of those scenes where this movie is constantly asking the audience, "Did I just see something like normal that it's being blamed for, or did I just see something supernatural?" But maybe not. Like Grace is being asked that question. She's being asked to question all of her science. And the audience is being asked the same thing. We're seeing the movie through her point of view. And so achieving those moments, is really important.
Moment achieved. Thank you so much. A pleasure to speak with you. And I look forward to everyone else seeing this movie.
Me too.
Have a great day.